I decided to feed my dogs raw. I was buying prepackaged, commercially prepared raw, and realized the benefits of feeding raw, and then transversely turning that into a company. So I added a page to my website, my breeding program website, added a page about raw feeding and about a little menu with chicken, beef, and turkey, and I thought, okay, we'll see where it goes. And we didn't know that it would get like it is today. We're growing really, really rapidly. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that we can offer a good quality product at prices that most people can say is comparable to the cost of purchasing it themselves and making it themselves. There's going to be more and more raw pet food companies that are going to be opening up. The consumer reports are saying that raw pet food is going to make up 20% of the market share of pet food sold in Ontario by 2017. My basic response to that is that they have, first of all, your dog has an enzyme in its saliva called lysozyme. So you and I do not have lysozyme in our saliva. And lysozyme is like Lysol, it lyses bacteria. So they have enzymes in their saliva that kill bacteria that you and I do not. And then it would also come down to just how their stomachs work as well. So our stomachs are 21 times the length of our bodies, whereas your dog's digestive tract is probably 9 times the length of his body. So it's a much faster, shorter digestive tract. His digestive tract is also, his stomach kind of looks like a folded accordion when it's empty. So it's kind of got lots of creases and folds in it, and in between those creases and folds is where you're going to find all of those glands that secrete the digestive enzymes into their gut. So when they stretch the stomach, which is why you should, if you can, feed an adult dog 1 meal a day, you stretch the stomach, you open up all the digestive juices and secretions come into the food that they just ate, and they start breaking it down really quickly. Then because it's a short digestive tract, it's meant to be digested quickly, so it's in and it's out. So when you feed a raw food diet, it's not advised that you feed dry and raw together, because what's going to happen is your dry food is going to slow down the digestive process of the raw, and that is what we call toxic stew. Because what happens then is the raw food sits in the gut too long, and that causes diarrhea and vomiting. So you want, if you do have people that you do know that feed raw and dry together, I would first say to them to absolutely not feed the two in the same meal. And then if you do decide to feed raw and dry, you need to separate them by at least 12 hours. The other thing that a lot of people don't understand is your dog's stomach needs to have a very thick mucus liner. So when you're feeding dry food, it puts your dog in a constant state of dehydration. So in order to actually rehydrate the kibble, your dog needs to suck in moisture, and it usually sucks in moisture even from the mucus liner that's supposed to be in its gut. So a dog's diet is supposed to be a wolf's diet is 80% moisture, and our raw fed blends are pretty much anywhere between 65 to 70% moisture. So almost all the moisture they need is already in the diet that they're receiving, whereas a dry food diet contains only 10% moisture. So they need to take in an incredible amount of water. Most people are unaware of how much water your dog actually needs to drink, and that's 1 ounce for every pound of body weight. So bloat on average will take, your risk factors in a large barrel-chested dog is 16 out of every 100. So 16% of barrel-chested dogs like Wines, Shepherds, Great Danes, for instance, are at risk for bloat on dry food diets. Statistically, your chances of getting bloat on a raw food diet drops to less than 1%. If you talk to veterinarians, if you've had a dog that's bloated, the very first thing they're going to do to you is put you on a canned diet. Because moisture is the biggest reason why dogs bloat, is because they're sucking in moisture again, trying to rehydrate that dry food, and that's what causes the stomach to twist. In my experience, I just add the supplement back in myself. I recommend Science Pure, which is made in Abbotsford, BC. It's a Canadian-made company, and it's a glucosamine protein MSM formula, and it's a white powdered supplement that you just add to their diet. The other option is to feed things like chicken feet, natural forms of glucosamine, which can be found in cartilage and sinews. I do recommend putting them on a joint care supplement, and it's usually the first 2 years of life that are the most important for those types of supplements. A lot of people fail to recognize how important it is that they actually get those supplements when they're growing, because it's the joints and hips and cartilage that are forming when they're puppies that actually need those supplements. So typically when we're dealing with pancreatitis, it usually has to do a lot to the fact that they can't have high fat in their diet.
Right.
So they need to have a low fat diet, which I would say is better accomplished by feeding raw than feeding any other type of diet, because we can actually choose formulas that are lower in fat and better suited for their digestive needs. So typically when I'm dealing with a dog that has pancreatitis, I go for lower fat options. I would not feed lamb, for instance. I'd be very hesitant to feed any type of fish, because fish tends to be higher in fat, like salmon and our mackerel, very high in fat. But beef is a great option. If you can feed skinless chicken necks, for instance, some raw meaty bones in their diet. Duck would be a great option. Turkey is on that, it's skin-on turkey, so dogs do need a percentage of fat, but every dog's ability to digest and deal with the fat is a little bit different. So my introduction back to the raw food diet would be to start on something that was certainly low fat. A lot of these conditions are degenerative, so it's not like this is an acute situation where he just developed this in the last 3 weeks. This has been growing for 5 or 6 years' time, and now it's manifested itself. So now we have to kind of work with a body that's kind of breaking down and just kind of help it along. So raw is not going to be the cure for this condition. It'll always have pancreatitis, but we can certainly manage the symptoms and hopefully provide relief without having to put them on a veterinary prescribed pill. A lot of veterinarians will talk to you about renal failure or kidney stones, bladder stones, and things like that as a reason for not feeding raw, or a reason why you need to be on a veterinary prescribed formula because your dog is developing uric crystals or bladder stones and those types of things. What I will tell you is that the biggest reason for a lot of that has to do with moisture. So a lot of the reasons why your dogs are developing bladder stones and bladder crystals and having kidney failure is because they're not hydrated enough. And so feeding raw would be the best way to ensure that your dog is fully hydrated. When you do deal with crystals are formed by minerals, that excess buildup of minerals. So every dog kind of deals with minerals differently. If the diet contains artificial vitamins and minerals, I would say your dog is more likely to create these types of bladder stones. So think of calcium carbonate, which is actually like limestone, versus raw meaty bones, real natural calcium that your dog can actually use. I would say feeding a raw diet would address the formation of crystals. There are some veterinarians that also tell you to go on a low mineral diet, so let's cut the amount of organ meats that they're on. So that I would say at least keep a minimum of 5% organ meats in their diet, but don't feed them a high percentage of red meats or a high amount of organ meats in their diet if they are dealing with bladder stones or bladder crystals. I personally have not had to deal with bladder stones ever in any of my dogs. Urinary tract infections, I certainly did deal with a lot before I started feeding raw, and I have not had any reoccurrence of that since. So I would say that feeding raw is certainly a good way to address those possible concerns. My raw-fed dogs fed one time in the evening after a whole day could still go the next day 8 hours in the field and not have to be refueled during the day. I would say if you were looking for keeping her satisfied, keeping her energy, I see a lot of my puppy families will send me back testimonials of how they're much better behaved their dog is in puppy class because they're now being fed raw. Typically, if you're dealing with gas, it usually means that the food that you're feeding your dog is not being digested adequately, which also means that your dog is not deriving 100% nutrition from what you're feeding it. So flatulence is actually caused by your dog's inability to digest a protein. Every type of protein, whether it's a plant protein or a meat protein, is broken down into amino acids. And your dog's digestive tract, there's 26 amino acids that it needs, but 13 that are essential amino acids in its gut. If the food is not digested sufficiently enough, it passes through the digestive wall into the bloodstream or into the colon in an not 100% digested, and that causes disturbance. Digestive enzymes absolutely are a great way to ensure that your dog is digesting all its food, and I would say any dog, regardless of its age, it should always, on occasion, be put on a digestive enzyme. I would say one of the best things you could do as well is to put them on a probiotic just so you can reestablish good gut bacteria. The benefit of feeding some raw meaty bones in your dog's diet is, of course, the dental benefit of doing so. So things like chicken backs, chicken necks, turkey necks, duck necks, elk necks, those are great raw meaty bones, and we like the neck bones because they're not calcified hard bones. Of course, when you're feeding raw, you have to make sure you create a balance. So if you're going to be feeding raw meaty bones for one meal, you need to ensure that the other meal is when they're going to be getting all the necessities like the organ meats and such, and the muscle meats that they need to make the diet completely balanced. What I find is a good ratio is to do 2 to 3 meals of raw meaty bones. It also strengthens their jaw muscles, which is great for their teeth. And you want those bones that they're actually going to chomp on, and you're going to see them go on their sides and go like that, because that's cleaning all that tartar and plaque off the sides of their teeth. You have to size the bone to the dog. So you don't want to choose like the little marrows that are cut like that for the Chihuahua. So what you want to do is you want to choose a bone that he's not going to be able to swallow whole. I also recommend for young dogs to actually feed the bones frozen, because if you feed it frozen, they're less likely to be able to try to swallow it whole. So you have to be careful when you're feeding marrows, calcified bones, even antlers, because you know, fractured or cracked teeth can be pretty costly. So I usually tell people is to thaw it in your refrigerator, let it sit on your counter for like half an hour before you feed it, or sit it in a little bit of warm water. It's not so important when your dog's been on the raw for a while, because usually at that point in time their systems are a little bit more adjusted to how cold the food is and they can handle it. One scenario that I think plays a lot into it is that a lot of our vaccinations are made on egg white. So an egg white protein, I mean, a lot of the allergy response that we see to a lot of the dogs is because we're over-vaccinating our animals, and that causes an allergic reaction. If your dog has started on raw as a puppy and is on a rotational diet of proteins, very rarely will they develop an allergy to chicken. Production of yeast is what causes the itching, and you can cut the production of yeast by cutting starch. When you see dogs licking their feet, or ear infections, or hot spots, those are all indications that your dog has excessive yeast. And every dog has a little bit of yeast on their outer skin, but when it becomes a problem is when they have too much yeast. And if we're feeding even a grain-free diet, the yeast can still populate because it's still getting starch in their diet. So cut the starch, feed full raw, and you'll probably cut all that ear infections and goofy stuff like that. Typically it's because they eat too fast or because the food's too cold. Another reason is if the food is not ground enough for them and they're not chewing the food, it's causing like some type of irritation when it goes down. Add warm water to it to make it more soupy so they can't just like swallow it up. The other option is to put it on a plate and mash it down with a fork. Give them half of it and then give them the other half in 5 minutes time. I use dehydrated beef lung for training treats. I find it's light, it's breakable, it's pretty cost economical. Your dog doesn't need fish oils for heart health, it needs it for EPA fats. I would say going with a liquid fatty acid like an omega-3 herring oil would be a great solution. I would say get some chicken thighs, mash up some fruits and veg, pick up a little bit of beef liver, chop it all up. There's plenty of companies right now that are coming out with a dehydrated raw. So they dehydrate it and then you just have to add the moisture back in and feed it to them.